You're watching American DA Live. On today's show, host Jack Patty, Ray the DA, and Detective Fran Root will discuss the case of Tina Powell and LaFonda Foster. Back in 1986, Powell and Foster went on a sensational killing spree. The 5 victims were shot, stabbed, and run over with a car, and some were even burned when the car was set on fire. Powell and Foster were convicted for murder in 1987. Powell was sentenced to life in prison for 1 murder, and life in prison without the possibility of parole for the other 4 murders. Foster was originally sentenced to death, but in the 90s that was changed to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Stay tuned for more details on this case.
7 minutes after 9 o'clock, 9:07, as we welcome you into the 9 to 10 show for this Forensic Friday, the 22nd day of April. This is American DA Live with Commonwealth Attorney Ray Larson. Ray, good morning.
Good morning, Jack.
Got another local case, very high profile. I'm not sure where it would rank in the most high profile cases in the city, but it certainly would be in the top handful, I'm sure.
Oh, it is.
Tell us about it.
Well, last week we saw on television and on the radio and in the newspaper that Tina Hickey Powell was up for parole, as are most of the people who were convicted and sentenced to life without parole for 25 or 26 years ago. This was a case involving 2 defendants, LaFonda Faye Foster and Tina Hickey Powell, and it occurred back in 1986, and 5 people were murdered. Now Tina, who got a life without parole for 25 years sentence, is up for parole, excuse me, and so it's back on the front burner. And you said to me last week, boy, it'd be interesting to talk about that. So we called the lead investigator in this case back then, Fran Root. Fran was a dapper detective who I guess was running the homicide unit at that time.
It was about 18, I think.
or so.
Yeah.
But he's now working, and he's retired, but is now working at the Department of Criminal Justice training police officers, and he was the investigator, and I was one of the prosecutors along with Mike Malone, and we thought it would be interesting to talk about this case. Fran, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
I don't know if we've talked about this case before or not.
We have.
A long time ago.
A few years.
Yeah.
Well, before we get into the case itself, what exactly is going to happen technically right now with this scene going before the parole board?
Well, as you'll remember, we've been talking about parole a lot lately.
Mm-hmm.
And they went and talked to Tina Hickey Powell, and and they couldn't decide. The 2 people, remember, they have 2 board members that go and interview.
There are 9 on the. Are there 9?
I think there are 9 on the parole
Yeah.
board, but they had 2 that go and talk to these people individually. And I think they can recommend parole, or they can recommend a deferral of 24 months, maybe even 5 years. But apparently these people wanted to recommend more time than that
Before she's eligible
again,
Yeah.
and then that decision is deferred to the full parole board, and they couldn't, for some reason, couldn't get enough people together to make that decision last week. So I think it's going to be the first of next week when they make that decision.
Okay.
So that's where Tina is now. Faye Foster is in prison for the rest of her life. She's got a life without parole sentence, and so that's where she is. So she's hunkering down in western Kentucky somewhere.
Got a message early this morning. We had posted on our Facebook page that we were going to be talking about this case this morning. Got from one of the victims' grandsons, Mr. Kearns.
Yep. Carlos Kearns was one of the victims at the time.
Said it was my grandfather, and no parole should be granted. How many appeals or motions have the pair made? One was that the prison wasn't earthquake-proof. Do you know about that?
No,
That's what it
I'm
said.
glad I didn't.
It says a mockery of the system and little value for human life except for their own. So That's what a relative of one of the victims thinks about it.
Well,
So I'll let you continue from there, sir.
okay, Fran, so let's, I can remember specifically that night being called and that there had been a homicide, and it was in the parking lot of what's now Burke Furniture. But at that time there was a place called Godfather's Pizza there, and it was in that parking lot. And so I went to the scene, and there you were. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about the police response first to what appeared to be a homicide in a parking lot that turned into far more as the evening went on.
In fact, tomorrow is the anniversary, the 26th anniversary of that murder, and it was about 9 o'clock at night. A lot drier than it is right now, and it was actually a fairly nice night with a full moon. The medical examiner, Dr. John Hunsaker, that was his first notation at the crime scene as he looked up at the moon, and I guess that should have told us that there was more to come after we had started processing that scene. The scene was unique in many ways, and the trauma to the body was almost unequaled in many ways. That it was so varied, most obvious being the drag marks and tire marks across the body and through the parking lot, and just the overall brutality of it. That's why I had called you originally and called the medical examiner to the scene, in addition to the coroner's office.
You know, Jack, when I got there, the drag marks, because this woman was, and I think this was Trudy. Trudy, was it
Yes,
Trudy?
Trudy Harrell.
Yeah. And Trudy was dragged under the car for some significant distance, and you could see the bloody trail, especially during when it became daylight, and we needed those photographs to be able to show to a jury ultimately. And so it's, you know, so she was dragged under the car, obviously run over, but what other kind of injuries did we ultimately find with her?
Well, we found very unique paired stab wounds to the torso and neck, and also we found what we suspected to be small caliber gunshot wounds, all that are present at that scene.
To learn more, tune in every Friday morning at 9 a.m. on News Talk 590.